Hey, hey,
Hey.
hey, everyone. Welcome. It's Naomi Wolf, CEO of Daily Cloud, and I'm really honored to be talking to Meghan Mansell today. Meghan, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. And Megan's got a very distinguished bio. She's experienced as a district education director over special populations integration. So she serves, in her program, serves students who are profoundly disabled, immunocompromised, undocumented, autistic, and other challenging placements. She is experienced in writing and monitoring protocol implementation under full ADA, that's Americans with Disabilities Act, OSHA, and AIER compliance. So these are different government programs to make sure there's no discrimination in education, in the workplace, and also safety. She also has a background in hazardous environments, PPE applications, which includes which masks and other respirators work, when, and why. So with that, I'm sure you all can guess why I was especially interested in talking to, may I call you Megan? Megan?
Yeah.
Um, there's so much discussion about masks, and a lot of it is ideological, and a lot of it, when we're talking about a physical thing in a purely ideological way, that's just silly. Unfortunately, masks have been politicized. They're supposed to indicate who you voted for, and that is all really nonsense. As many of you know, I've been very concerned about masks and about, for a lot of reasons, some of them having to do with the fact that I'm a stepmom, and my 9-year-old stepson, his school has to wear masks. And I've also read the aerosol studies on which presumably a lot of this is based, and they don't support the policy. And I've been asking Governor Baker, I live in Massachusetts part-time, what is the science? What is the science? And at a local level, I was told there is no science. We haven't been presented with any. I'm not surprised because there is no science. Megan here knows the science. So my first question to you, Megan, is tell me what you feel about the science behind masks. Are they
Thank you
useful?
for thank you
And
for asking.
go ahead.
We have been, I'm not going to say intentionally, but at this point, we need to be more specific with exactly what we're talking about when referring to masks. There are hundreds upon thousands of kinds of masks and respirators. They are not interchangeable. They do not all do the same thing. And when you get this wrong, especially with teeny tiny particulate like COVID, um, you need to look at the lowest possible particle size under pressure. And if you're not doing that, then you're leaving yourself open for a whole host of errors. And so what I believe we have more than anything is a large number of people who newly feel they identify as immunocompromised and feel unrepresented by the public sector. And then we've had a PPE misapplication without looking at particle physics applications in regards to PPE. And so COVID at 0.06 to 1.4 microns, when there's a pressurized exhale behind that, you're taking any droplet and can force filter and aerosolize that droplet. And there's already aerosols being generated within that respiratory outburst, whether it's a plosive force generating event like a cough, sneeze, or scream, or if it's just general respiration. But the droplet can then be force filtered through a mask or respirator, depending on the fit and the amount of pressure being released. But then you're taking what would have fallen in a predictable 6-foot arc and you're sending it into an 18 to 20-foot trajectory where it remains aloft within respiratory range for hours. And so at the beginning, the CDC and the World Health Organization came out and said, we believe this is solely a droplet-based pathogen. And so all of our mitigation measures were based solely on droplet-based pathogens. But when we introduced airborne into the mix, there was never a pivot. There was never a pivot at any of our nation's test sites or testing facilities. We should be testing in isolation. We should be really specific about things like our PCR thresholds and making sure that when we tell somebody that they've had something, that they've actually had it and are not inadvertently exposing them, because your test admins are also the most likely people to come in contact with a given pathogen. And then they're coming into contact with concerned people who have been immunosuppressing themselves by remaining in isolation for extended
So I'm
periods
going
of
to
time.
jump in and interrupt, Megan.
Sure.
You're saying so much that's so valuable.
Okay.
There's so much there. I just want us to unpack it a little bit
Sure.
so we all understand it. May I just say before we do that, I love, love, love passionate public health advocates who really know their stuff, just like I really love real scientists, because the nerdiness of the detail is so beautiful. Like you really, really know this stuff and you really, really care about it. And that's such a refreshing antidote to the nonsense of being bandied about by politicians and media types who have not studied particulates of this size and PPE and public health the way you have. So let me go back to one thing first. You said, but you skipped over it, that a lot of people are identifying as immunocompromised now that didn't used to. What do you mean by that?
I think that a lot of people have, and sometimes it's erroneous and sometimes it isn't, but they consider themselves of a category of people in need of a little special care right now. And I've never seen anybody, picketing at a wheelchair ramp, but I know personally what it's like to have an exemption in a mask mandating district and how people treat you. And there are some people out there who have had horrible things happen to them and also have horrible health conditions. And
okay, so let me jump in and explain to everyone. I think I understand. You live in Florida, but in a district that mandates masks.
yes.
So in order to get out of that, people have to apply for a health exemption. So a lot of people are saying they're immunocompromised, whether they are technically or not is kind of not important. What's important is that is a way to not wear a mask, and you're saying people are treated badly as a result of not
I'm
wearing.
saying people who are immunocompromised, a lot of them want people to wear masks because they think that it's a public health measure that is helping to protect them. And I'm trying to point out some flaws in our application here and bring it back around to personal protection, because there are personal protective measures, including PPE, but really, really, as a last resort there, we have far better measures in mitigation and personal protection for immunocompromised.
So when I jump in, just let me ask, because I'm trying to translate all of this to something a bright 16-year-old would understand, which is
Absolutely.
I try to prep all of our commentators, because you're all talking about deeply expert material, or material in which you are deeply expert. You're saying that it's really important for people on the receiving end of feeling like they're immunocompromised. They want others to wear masks because they are afraid other people breathing without masks will harm them.
Yes.
You want them to understand that that is not the case, and that they can protect themselves by wearing masks the right way and taking other measures, but that other people standing 6 feet away are not harming them if they are not wearing masks. Is that correct?
Yes, because your respiration, and well, I'm not saying that they are not capable of harming them if they are 6 feet away. If they are 6 feet away from an immunocompromised person and a transmissible positive, we have a bad situation for that immunocompromised person to be in. And so I get into things like bubble isolate, subset populating, and osmotic immigration for controlled populations. And I can break that down.
Talk to me like I'm a high school student.
Okay.
So are you saying that outside, even if other people are immunocompromised, I am not endangering them by wearing a mask and not breathing on them? Is that correct?
Outside, I don't think that in the outside world you have you don't have restricted airflow. And so I don't think outside we need to be taking anywhere near the precautions that we are. And you know, especially it depends. Are you outside huddled under a pergola with 60 people who are transmissibly positive, or are you across a basketball court huddled in a mask, mad that somebody across the basketball court is not also in a mask, or passing them on the
These are
sidewalk?
really important gradations, and just teasing out this one question of masks outdoors, you're confirming what I, as a non-scientist, understood, and it changed how I live my life after having read the aerosol studies. I don't want to be huddled, you know, face to face with someone who's symptomatic for 10 to 30 minutes, even outside. However, I should not, like out there, there's a walkway which is completely desolate along a riverfront, or a waterfront, but my governor says I have to wear a mask walking along there. That is nonsensical.
That is nonsensical.
Okay, thank you.
That is nonsensical.
Really important distinctions. And I think what you said about airflow is very important too. Again, confirms what I've read, because the real thing we should be talking about or learning about is not so much masks and is someone around you masked no matter where you are, but things like, what is the airflow? What's the ventilation? Is it inside or outside? And
humidity has a lot to do with it also. And the person who is trying to protect themselves, their immune function has a lot to do with it. How healthy are you? And at the beginning of this, somebody should have come out and said, some of you are going to die. Some of you are going to take added risk that you shouldn't have. You will designate yourself incorrectly, and some of you will be wrong, just as some of you are wrong every time you get behind the wheel of a car, just as some of you are wrong every time you engage in high-risk sports activities and things of that nature. But we've taken free will and personal risk mitigation out of the conversation, and especially educated personal risk mitigation, because if we had used these same failed measures during the AIDS crisis, and we're telling people, use this, we're handing it out at health departments, and it's something that expressly and by design does not protect them from the pathogen at hand, well, of course that would matter. And people would take really good care of making sure, you know, based on particulate size and just given environs consideration, if this were something like aerosolized cyanide or something of that nature, if they saw something that could harm them potentially, if they consider themselves not one of the 99.6% who will survive this, you know, of the 31,200,000 people who are of that 0.4% on a global basis, if we give them consideration as individuals with free will, but also make really specific about what our public health recommendations are, because their lives depend on us being accurate in doing so, then I think that we can kind of begin to meet in the middle and make meaningful accommodation for public health.
Megan, let me jump in and try to restate what I heard you say. That's really important. And maybe I don't need to restate all of these things.
Okay.
Like, people have said in the comments, shut up, Naomi. You know, other times I've tried to make sure that dense material was understood, but this is so important. You're confirming what the signers of the Great Barrington Declaration basically said, and other people familiar with leading public health measures in a pandemic have always had as policy, which is educate people, give them the tools to be successful in protecting their own health, give them the tools to assess risk. As other physicians have said, people are experts about their own risk and their own health. And you're also saying, and the AIDS crisis is a great comparison, you're also saying the small percentage of people who are actively at risk of not surviving if they get infected, we should give them support so that they know how to protect themselves. And I assume you're going to be getting to that, but it doesn't include absolutely everyone who is bound to survive it being masked all the time or taking other measures like being locked in at home that are immunosuppressant. Is that what you're saying, basically?
Yes, and we can't accommodate you properly in a school system or in the public setting if you don't identify yourself as having a need. And so a lot of what I have to do kind of within districts has to do with, okay, if you have a child with a peanut allergy, if no one ever knows that there's a kid within the district with a peanut allergy, we will never be able to properly accommodate them. But if you declare an entire school as peanut free, then somebody's great grandma is going to pack lunch and mess up, and someone like me is going to stab an EpiPen into a kid's leg on a playground. Or you designate a specific class as your nut-free class. You get buy-in ahead of time from a controlled group where there's a name associated with the need.
Okay.
And when you're able to do that, people behave themselves better.
So this is really interesting. You're saying right now we're treating everyone in the world basically as if they're immunocompromised,
Yes.
and locking everyone down and restricting everyone's access to everything.
Yeah.
But in fact, that's not good public health policy. And better public health policy would be to say, okay, everyone go about their business. However, if you are immunocompromised or at risk, identify yourself so that measures can be put in place in schools and workplaces and so on to protect you. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and within the public sector, you also need to understand that under ADA law, those who present the chaos variable of those unable to mask have the same public sector integration rights as those who feel the need for everybody to be masking. So having early hours for immunocompromised to allow for overnight airflow, shared surface sanitation, and if you want to go overboard, UVC sanitation of, the environment, things of that nature, offer meaningful protection. And then those people going during those limited hours can space themselves better. They're not commingling with the grody rest of us, and they very well should not be.
Gotcha.
I have
Slow down.
3 little kids, ages 1, 3, and 5, and I know,
They're gross.
exactly.
I hear you. As a mom, I hear you. Yeah. So I'm going to jump in again. You're saying that public health so you're saying two important things. Americans with Disabilities Act, literally, I never thought of this, and this opens up the door to a huge number of lawsuits. According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, you cannot discriminate against people who can't wear masks or won't wear masks.
And it's wherein mere presence does not constitute direct threat, even for a contagiously transmissibly positive individual. They still have public sector rights, which is why it's never been of question for you to go in a Target and pick up your flu medication pre-COVID. And that is a contagious, transmissible respiratory illness. Now, am I saying that's best practice? Right. Am I saying that, drive-up service for the contagious individuals is not better? No. Am I saying that having clean shopping carts all of a sudden is a terrible thing? Nope. But
okay, got it. So it's basically a lot of these mitigation measures, and we're seeing them create real medical apartheid in other parts of the world, like Israel and Britain, and even our Governor Cuomo proposed a vaccine passport. Those are discriminatory under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Those are, and you don't get to know what's wrong with somebody else. Also, under IDEA, all children within the American school districts have right to least restrictive educational environment. Right. And I'm sorry, but I have serviced the students that you don't even know exist, and there are children required to wear helmets with pre-existing biting conditions who are 350 pounds, and I want you to try to keep a mask on them all day. I don't want you to try that because it would be horrifying for the nonverbal child who's not understanding what you're doing to them and why, and medical consent is required in the use of any kind of mitigating apparatus, in addition to medical clearance within workplaces under OSHA. We have really specific guidelines for workplace PPE.
Mhm.
And this seems like it's not related, but it is. It's another rights violation because it's based on minimum possible particle size that you would be exposed to within a workplace, whether it's a pathogen or a vapor or anything of that nature. And so to just toss this all out the window, cloth masks are expressly non-mitigating, expressly non-PPE under OSHA, should not be required for airborne pathogen in any workplace. And surgical masks are expressly non-mitigating for airborne pathogen, porous by design, and are for catching splatter or large droplet in close proximity settings for bloodborne pathogen like dental practices and surgery settings.
So I want to stop you, Megan. It's so much good stuff. Don't read from notes for just a few minutes, because I promise you'll say everything you want to say. This is super important. Let me go back to your good point you made a few minutes ago. When we were talking about how it's actually against the Americans with Disabilities Act to discriminate in any way between mask wearing people and not mask wearing people, and you pointed out that it's against the law in terms of medical consent to ask anyone if they've been vaccinated, if they've not, to allow people in if they've been vaccinated to an event if it's public, and and to keep them out if it's not.
Because then they're going to ask why, and it's none of your business to know why.
Right, absolutely. And I've also been hearing along these lines from parents of kids who have and I'm sure you work with these kids all the time, kids with hearing disabilities, kids with autism, kids who are on the spectrum. And I'm really worried as a step parent that kids with any kind of learning challenges or hearing challenges can't learn. Their social emotional learning is impaired, and their brain development, I believe, is impaired by not being able to see people's faces. Let me leave that aside for just a minute.
But that's so important.
Okay.
That's so important. And I was going to take it back to infant development and young childhood development too, because so much of what you garner for social and emotional and language development, teeth, tongue, and lip placement for language development, and so much of our expressions and our social understanding is from mimicking caregiver expressions. And so you're going to have a lot of children identify as on the spectrum who otherwise wouldn't have, just because they don't have the ability to see faces to mimic those expressions. And those therapies are extensive that will be required.
So, I mean, you're putting out so much that's so important, but you're confirming what I've been observing. I've been observing children losing expression on their lower faces and losing kind of appropriate eye contact because there's nothing to see, right? And losing the ability to pick up social cues and kind of losing communication skills.
Yes.
And visibly, like notably, since masks have been introduced in school. So that is super important. I want to talk more about that, but let me go back for a minute to what you were saying about public policy, because you've given this so much thought. You were saying if people identified themselves the way we do with people with allergies or people who are by choice compromised, with sustained HIV impairment to their immune systems, other kinds of impairment to immune systems, then we could create like special hours when they can shop and not be exposed to other people who might be infectious, or special, situations for them that support their health. Or they could be, if they're teachers, remote teaching, while other people who are not immunocompromised can be in classes where there is no risk to them. And this would solve a lot of problems in terms of protecting people who are immunocompromised and allowing everyone else to live their lives and not be impaired. Is that correct?
And I love how you nailed it on the teachers as well. If you identify as being immunocompromised and you feel like your job puts you at added risk that you didn't have before that, you also have right to accommodation as long as it is, reasonable and you can still function in some capacity of your job. You could be teaching hospital homebound. You could be teaching lecture style where you're physically distanced from students, like in high school setting. There are so many creative ways that we can do school. And if you're a student matched with a teacher who is also identifies as immunocompromised, if you rely completely on delivery and drive up services and you have such a really low contact life and you want to keep it that way, we can form you into pre-existing bubble isolate subsets, which are tiered groupings where you're matched with someone who also identifies as immunocompromised, and you have a certain checklist of behaviors to fall into a given tier depending on the level of protection you need. And you can use things like testing barriers. That's what I was talking about, osmotic immigration. That's the use of testing strategically before accessing those vulnerable people to know that you're not exposing them or that they're not exposing each other.
Got it. So basically, I mean, right now we're testing all kids all the time. We're testing college students all the time. And you're saying there's no good reason. We should be supporting people who are immunocompromised, keeping them in a low contact environment if they want to be.
And I'm saying, you don't have to get rid of your state emergency funding. Just use it correctly and stop with the mandates, because the mandates are a compliance tool, but we're not being specific enough about PPE to have any meaningful impact with these really vague things that don't actually protect the immunocompromised. Gotcha. When I've written plans, it's for a specific individual. When I've had to keep up with and monitor protocol and write these things, they're for specific individuals that I care about, whether or not they have a good outcome in this. And looking at it as an individual basis like that is how you accommodate the public.
So let me jump in, Megan. Sure. Sorry to keep interrupting you.
I will stop. I will keep talking forever until you do. So please interrupt me.
I see how passionate you are, and rightly so. So that makes such good sense. Instead of subjecting all these kids, all these students to constant testing, which I worry about what that does to them psychologically. You test people before they come in contact with someone who's immunocompromised. And again, if people want a low contact life, as you put it, they can choose that. Now let me go on. This is all fantastic public policy. You also mentioned emergency funding. A lot of people, especially parents, are saying, why is this happening? Why is, I was just asking, why is my synagogue not opening? Why are the schools not opening, says a mom in California, and so on and so on. You just mentioned that there's emergency money going to states. Is that one of the reasons that we're having such ridiculous policies?
Well, I've heard that that's why a lot of the governors don't want to lift the policies, right, because they think that it sees an end to the CARES Act money. Right. But I want to show them how to use that money more strategically, which PPE you should be spending it on, which environment sanitation you should be spending it on. This is just like any other disaster, but we did not have a good national plan. We've shown our cards on that. The CDC and the World Health Organization had since the late 1940s to get a plan together for this. And, I think that we can do this far better, just very different from what it currently looks like. So and I don't think that anybody should have to wear a mask if they don't want to. The reason I get into things like the bubble isolates with strategic testing is because I think that human touch and personal interaction and presence and proximity is important no matter how immunocompromised you are. And I've seen the really depressing side of children who spend years in isolation, and I don't wish for that on anybody.
Absolutely. I mean, you've seen firsthand how isolation causes depression, creates mental illness, and we're imposing that on millions and millions of students and elderly and adults for that matter. Let me now go to my last two questions because we could talk forever.
Sure.
Don't worry, Meghan. You'll come back. You'll have all the time you need. You're the one with the answers to so much of what's puzzling people. To sum up, before I go on to my last two questions, it sounds like the way these mandates and restrictions have been rolled out is both stupid in terms of public health policy and that it should be much more granular, specific, tailored to the individual and not imposed on everyone in a one-size-fits-all way. That's one thing you said. And another thing you said is it sounds like a lot of it is illegal.
Yes.
Frankly unlawful. It violates OSHA law, it violates Adults with Disabilities Act, and it violates other workplace measures. So I'm just going to say that because it sounds like you're saying that.
Full violation of IDEA sections 300.114 through 300.119. That's federal education integration law. That's what people should be using to push back against their school systems. Read it. It's not long, but it's very specific.
Well, we'll post that, and that is a fantastic resource, especially for parents who don't know what tools to use to push back. Sure. Now, let me move on to two last things I want to talk to you about, and we could go on forever, as I said. One of them is you started out by saying masks aerosolize what would otherwise be droplets. So it sounds like, and this is one reason I reached out to you when I saw you say this on Twitter, it sounds like you're saying that actually we're not doing anyone any favors by wearing masks. We make situations more dangerous because if we don't wear masks, if God forbid we're infected, the droplets will fall within 6 feet. But when we wear a mask, we aerosolize that contagious material and it can go further and hang out longer in the air. Is that what you're saying?
And I have excellent citations on that as well. And not only that, the more fit you have hospitals designating their N95s. They're giving vented N95s to COVID positive patients upon release, and those produce this complete jet stream of focused particulates, and exhale filtration on those does not filter under 4 microns, and COVID at 0.06 to 1.4 microns is just sent in a pressurized stream. We have it so backwards.
Wouldn't they know that giving a COVID patient an N95 is going to do that?
You would think that. And we've given this false sense of security, and what I believe the whole masks protect the audience, not the wearer. The reason I believe people brought that into the conversation is because we had a supply chain issue with N95s, and for workplace requirements for personal protection, you have to have N95 or higher grade respirators plus eye protection as the baseline minimum provided for your workers. But if you tell them it's not to protect you, it's to protect those around you, then you have places like a grocery store in this town that required their workers to provide their own in order to be able to work. And I visited the same girl over a 2-week period who wore the same filthy surgical mask, handling leaky chicken packages and counting money and adjusting it constantly. Same mask for 2 weeks. And she's lucky that she's alive. I mean, Legionnaires and a whole host of other disgusting things. And there are microbial challenges as well as deoxygenating and hypercapnia-inducing effects that are...
Slow down because you're being super smart, not following. So I want to say this in English now.
Oh, sorry.
We're saying that people are being told in the workplace something that is not true, which is most masks will protect others, and that's why you have to wear them. And there is not evidence for that. That's not true, especially not from COVID, because it's smaller than even an N95 mask, let alone a cloth mask. Then you went into saying there are other gross, bad things that can happen to you from wearing a mask for 2 weeks. What are they? What are some of the bad things that can happen to you from wearing a mask medically? You just skipped over a lot of them.
Sorry, there are some really good references on that too.
I trust you.
Fiber.
This is
Okay.
the blog. Just say what are some bad.
Sure.
If what's the reason? Say, Naomi, here's what you can catch or what can happen to your health if you wear a mask for 2 weeks.
The fibers can come loose and your body cannot shake them free. Fibrosis is a very real concern there. Deoxygenation is when you have a lower access to respiratory inhaled oxygen, that for an extended period of time, and increased inhaled CO2 levels. And you also have the microbial challenges of not only what you wipe on a mask, or if you are wearing a mask in a public restroom and pick up particulate from that disgusting flush plume, but then also your body is constantly trying to get rid of things, whether it's pathogen, whether it's if you cough or you sneeze. Your expiration is what your body is rejecting.
Expiration, so, breathing out, right? What you're breathing out.
Sorry. Yes. What you are putting out, what you are breathing out, your body is trying to get rid of. And so you're constantly cycling that back. But we need to be really conscious about the effects of these things on human development, both for children and for the unborn, and the mothers carrying unborn children, because we have stillbirth rates up fourfold in developed countries. And in the mask-happy countries, we have an estimated 300,000 fewer births this year. 300,000 fewer human beings coming into the world on this planet. And these are, this is a conversation about being proactively pro-life, because these are wanted individuals who are being lost and never have a chance because their mothers need to keep their jobs and are being required to wear these things for 8-10 hours a day. And I've had 3 children myself. I know what a sensitive process pregnancy is, and to mess with something and require something that never would have passed an ethics violation, or no, an ethics review before being able to be tested, is just it's a real tragedy for me. It's something that the working class has no recourse in right now, and they're the ones that this will affect more than anybody else. The people who don't know how to fight for themselves.
Megan, you're saying something so important. So you're saying that you're seeing 300,000 fewer births. And you're saying, and this again is something, this was my last question, you're saying you have evidence that there is a correlation between stillbirths or miscarriages, I expect also, and hypoxia from wearing masks. Is that correct?
Well, we know that there are many, there are many birth conditions that can be from deoxygenation during birth and during late pregnancy. We have cerebral palsy is the big one that everybody's familiar with, without really thinking like, hey, a lot of kids got this from an umbilical cord being twisted or wrapped around their neck during birth, and they have lifelong effects from this. So why aren't you, considering the effects on the unborn of doing that same effect throughout that entire child's gestation period?
So in other words, we don't yet have a study, because it's such a new thing. It's like a huge experiment on humanity, confirming that there's a higher rate of stillbirth and miscarriage in moms who wore masks, but you are noting that there are many more stillbirths in the developed world. So correlation is not causation, but this is a very important thing to study. And you're noting that it's working class people who, and it's so true, who are forced to wear masks 12 hours a day, 8 hours a day, people who are more privileged, like I'm sitting here in my living room without a mask, talking to you for my job. And you are rightly saying, and I can say this after having had 2 children, it is absolutely intuitively correct that lowering oxygen levels is going to affect unborn babies. It's so, literally, when you're giving birth, so much of what happens in the American obstetrical system is to keep your baby from losing oxygen during
Yes.
the passage down the birth canal. We know that even a minute with low oxygen can cause lifetime irreparable damage to newborn babies or to fetuses that are, or I guess they're not fetuses at this point. What are they? Almost about to be born babies in the process.
Babies. I think I have a baby who technically was never born. He was removed, but he's still a baby. He was still a baby when they were trying to get him out. I think at one point you're just a baby.
I'm making the point that, you and I both know as women who have given birth how important oxygen is and how dangerous it is. Like literally so many C-sections, I wrote a book about this called Misconceptions. So many C-sections come about from the baby losing oxygen and the heart rate slowing, right? And you have to rush that mom into a C-section because that baby cannot be without oxygen for more than a very short time, or else there's permanent brain damage. Now we're saying that baby inside that pregnant mom has to have decreased oxygen for 9 months.
For 9 months.
8 hours a day, decreased oxygen for 9 months. We're going to give birth to a generation of people, of babies who may be impaired intellectually from their moms having had restricted oxygen. And same thing with the kids. I mean, their brains need to develop. Presumably, they need oxygen to develop, right?
There are zero efficacy standards for child-size masks. So if you see a mask on a child, it is untested. It probably was some homemade, unsterile thing that likely does nothing for anything close to the COVID-sized particulates, but anonymizes the child and makes them unable to even the lower visual field issues that some other people have gotten into as well with development of your motor control is really big. And
we'll talk about that in a follow-up call, but right now I just want to stress that isn't oxygen needed for so many aspects of babies being healthy in utero? I mean, like oxygen has to do with
critical. It's oxygen.
Oxygen. Well, walk us as non-scientists through why humans need oxygen and why babies in utero need oxygen. What does oxygen do that's important?
Well, oxygen fuels your cells. It's what keeps every cell in your body alive, and it's also what keeps cells dividing in utero. The supply of blood-based oxygen from the umbilical cord from the mother to the baby is a process that you wouldn't try to stem the umbilical cord to make where any fewer nutrients were getting to the child. So
that's exactly right.
That to the mother.
You're back like all the reasons, I was told to stay in good health as a gestating mom. The baby needs to keep growing, and if you restrict oxygen, that goes right to blood, and that goes right to cell development, and that goes right to growth, right?
I've spent 27 months without Brie, but you're telling me that I need to put something with shown deoxygenating and CO2 increasing, effects on my face while I am, and some people have jobs during pregnancy where they're exerting themselves, and it's not everybody's just sitting in a chair breathing.
So exerting yourself means you're breathing in more CO2 and more CO2, right? I mean, I can't help, and I promise this is my last kind of comment. I can't help remembering the warnings we were given when we were little. I'm 58, when there were paper bags and you were told, do not, and it was so much fun. You can, breathe into a paper bag, then you breathe your exhaled breath, and then you pass out. Right? That's what we were told. Don't breathe CO2. It's dangerous. Has that changed, or is it still dangerous to breathe CO2?
No, well, you're welcome to go get a bag and tell me how you feel.
But there's a reason you pass out, right? You pass out because your brain needs oxygen all the time and not CO2, right? So by replacing oxygen with CO2, you're starving your brain of something it needs to keep you alert, to keep your blood flowing, to keep you're gestating properly if you're pregnant. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's also increased carbon monoxide issues for anybody who's a smoker of any capacity. That's another carbon monoxide is something that doesn't usually come up except, and so you'll see people outside smoking, 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 put it up, and then their last breath is exhaled through a mask, and you're like, oh.
And so they're inhaling carbon monoxide when they
Yes,
breathe in again.
yes,
So many dangers. Meghan Mansell, is there one last positive thing you want to say? How can people help you and support you? I think the best thing we can do is post the links to OSHA
yeah.
and maybe post a model letter that parents can write using some of the information you've given
all
to
of all
schools.
of what I've discussed is in one article or another in my publications on rational ground,
Okay, we'll link
and
to those.
I can link to those. I'm on Twitter at Momosaurus Meg,
Good.
but
We need
I
to put.
believe that this was all done with the best of intentions. People wanted to help out when, when people were still doing the little drive-by parades and everything, but we didn't get specific enough. And then we got stuck thinking that the do-gooder thing that people were trying when they, truly had a supply chain issue is the best measure
And
long
it's
term. And we never stepped away from that. And we never pivoted to minimum possible particle size under pressure, which
okay.
is what we need to keep in mind for future outbreaks. Because in event of future pathogen, something far deadlier than this, people would just pivot right back to these same failed measures that they've been taught here, and it would have a far greater loss of life.
Okay, so people will read your work, we'll post it, we'll create a model letter people can use with this information, and we'll come back to you again. Meghan Mansell, what fantastically important information. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you. I really enjoyed my time with you today.
we're,
Thank you.
we're grateful for your expertise. Take care. We'll
Thank
circle
you.
back to you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.